Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the J Free 906 podcast. Shannon and Mike here with you tonight, along with a special guest that we'll bring on here in just a moment. But I wanted to say, hey, guys, how you doing? Another great episode last night.
Another fantastic episode.
And they had a special guest.
A couple of them.
Yes, a couple of them. I know, Jay and Ryan. So, yeah, we're going to have a lot of fun tonight, folks. First off, I wanted to say, if you have not already, please subscribe to the channel. And if you like the content of the show we do here tonight, give us a thumbs up. We really appreciate that. I saw some people already saying, give a thumbs up. Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Very, very much. It does help with all the YouTube algorithms. We are live also over on Rumble, and I wanted to let the folks that are watching over there know I do see the chat over there. If you want to jump in and say something, I'll be able to see that. For our special guest tonight, we will likely take some questions, but we'll see. But wait on the questions when you see before I'll ask for them when we get to that point. All right, so. And we have to be very, very careful, as always, with our questions because of NDAs and things like that. So keep that in mind when you're asking. Don't ask something that he obviously cannot talk about. So without further ado, let's jump into it. We're going to be talking about Skinwalker Ranch. Oh, I did a boo-boo there. Hold on just a second. There we go. All right. Skinwalker Ranch season 5 episode number 8, which was named Graves Concern, and the reason why was because of this gentleman right here. Please welcome Mr. Ryan Graves. Sir, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Well, I tell you what, it's an honor to have you here tonight, and it was great to see you on Skinwalker Ranch, on the ranch, and then helping out with some experiments and stuff last night. I did want to say, I know that you are a former F-18 pilot for the U.S. Navy, and I am former Navy myself. So thank you, sir, for your service. Appreciate that very, very much. I know that I enjoyed my time in, and it was a lot of fun. Looking back, at times it was tough. Which I'm sure you could relate.
It makes it worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know we've seen your face all over social media everywhere in the last year or so, and I know that you've had many podcasts that you've been on, and you've talked to that story over and over again. So we're not going to put you through all of that tonight. If you wanted to discuss any of that, that's fine. But again, I really wanted to find out, some stuff about, you being on Skinwalker Ranch. We love the show. We like to really kind of break it down, and Mike being an engineer, he likes to really get deep into the science of it all. We love that very much. We've had Erik on, and Pete Kelsey and the guys, and Thomas Winterton and all of them. And they shared with us some of the insides of what's going on there. What a fascinating place, is it not?
Yeah, certainly, and a very history place as well. And that was one of the things that initially, drew me into the conversation when I was invited out there. I was aware that there was, a pretty long history with that part of the country, that part of the world, Skinwalker Ranch and the surrounding lands. But, I used that as an opportunity to really educate myself on what had been happening there and how far back the story really went. And for me, it's easy to try to put one thing in a box or another, but the things that pilots have been seeing that they've been reporting to me are pretty unexplainable. And I'm not going to be hopefully arrogant enough to say that what's happening at Skinwalker Ranch is totally unassociated with what pilots are seeing or not. So one strange behavior I think is worth further understanding to see if there's any type of connections or correlations. So I thought it was a great opportunity for me to get out there firsthand, see what the team had been experiencing, see if there was an opportunity for me to witness anything that might correlate to what pilots have been seeing. So for me, that was my real motivation, kind of get my boots on the ground and see if there were any connections from what the team had been seeing there versus what pilots have been seeing elsewhere.
Exactly. And that's one of the interesting things. We've seen so much in TV news media and also social medias. We've seen so much happening around the world, UAP, UFO, UAP related, that It's just come to a point where, and then what we see on Skinwalker Ranch happening, people have to start taking it more seriously, in my opinion. I know that I kind of stole Shannon's thunder there, so sorry about that. I know you wanted to ask about that. If you,
No, not at all. I mean, I think, Ryan, you've already kind of answered one of my main questions, which is what drew you there. So, with that being said, once you did have boots on the ground, did are you able to say, like, is it similar to what you're seeing in other places or what pilots are reporting from other places? I know with the show being so heavily edited, not everything makes it to air, and I also understand that a bunch of stuff can't be shared as well, but curious if in your time there you felt like it was similar to what has been reported in the past.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think ultimately it's a little too soon to really make a definite conclusion as far as drawing that direct line. But the reality is that they and we saw things on our sensors and with our eyes that we didn't know what they were, and that's a very similar problem to what other pilots are having. So, I definitely think that spending the time to better understand what's happening there is important. And I'm really glad that the team that is working there now is putting the time and the resources into better understanding it, because ultimately that's the only way we're going to be able to figure out what's happening.
Right.
Absolutely. So let's jump into the show a little bit. We'll kind of walk through this a little, and I warned Ryan, folks, that I do have pictures. I have go through my pictures, but I did cut them down considerably this evening from what you're used to seeing. So, but we'll get started. One of the other people that we were happy to see up here on Skinwalker Ranch once again this season, Mr. Jay Stratton, of the UAP, former director of the UAP task force. Man, he had an experience last season with the whole GPS tracking and things that were going on, and hopefully one day, he'll join us on the show as well. I know, that he probably has a lot to talk about and a lot that he can't. So we'll hope that down the road we get to have him on. But it was really neat to see him back on the ranch, and the fact that he works so closely with Travis as well. And then, of course, you being on the show was really interesting. And it was a surprise, but I did hear one comment made about, and maybe it's wishful thinking on my part. They said something about, or I thought they said something about you maybe helping the team a little bit down the road. I really hope that happens, and I'm not going to ask you that question because I know you couldn't answer it anyway. But boy, I'd love to see you more involved with what's happening out there with all of your experience going forward in that. As I mentioned, former F-18 pilot for the United States Navy. And then, of course, that you had testified in Congress on UFOs. And the thing about that really interested me, it wasn't so much that you were coming out saying, "Hey, these things exist." It was the fact that what you're doing with, and I wanted to ask you also about your ASA, Americans for Safe Aerospace, and the concern you have for looking into this for that safety purposes. Can you tell us a little bit about ASA and how that all got started, and what is the main function of ASA?
Certainly. I started Americans for Safe Aerospace along with two other partners, Haley and Brad, who have been volunteering with me for almost 2 years now. And really, we just saw an opportunity to utilize the same playbooks that are typically used in DC to be able to influence our representatives on Capitol Hill, influence them to be able to speak, more coherently and intelligently on this topic, and hopefully be able to put forward legislation that would benefit the people and the stakeholders involved in this conversation. And so that's what we did. We created ASA as a 501c3 nonprofit with the goal of being able to, potentially educate on legislation that would make sense for those constituents. But what we were not expecting was that so many people, both a little bit before the hearing as well as after the hearing, would reach out through our organization directly to myself or to us to be able to share their own experiences. And typically these were other pilots that, related with the incident that I communicated, either a commercial or military veteran pilot. And they started, sharing what they had to share. And some of it was more historical, 70s, 80s, 90s about an incident that occurred. And while fantastical, some of them, hard to necessarily verify in any sense. But other than that, there were commercial pilots that were having more modern cases. Commercial pilots within the United States that were having things in 2019, 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24, right? So these pilots are seeing things right now in the past 5 or 6 years, and they're seeing them on flights not proactively, but they're expecting to see them. I actually spoke with a pilot last week who had not seen them. Spoke with a colleague of his who asked him if he had seen the light show recently, and actually specifically scheduled himself for a night flight, 8 of them on the schedule, in order to see if he couldn't witness these himself. And he ended up seeing them on 7 out of 8 of those flights.
Wow.
Holy smokes.
So it's quite common. And, what we've done at Americans for Safe Aerospace is we've took it upon ourselves to collect that data from these pilots. We've standardized a formal database. We're collecting these reports in a standardized fashion. And then we're using those reports to be able to detect trends, to be able to look for correlations across civilian, not civilian, they're all kind of civilian, but across what I would call like civilian ground cases, where it's just an average person of no particular expertise that's related to observing UAP that is making, that has reported something interesting. And what we found is that there are some group sightings that of pilots that have witnessed things in air across multiple aircraft, across ATC radar control, that were then reported through other channels by a general civilian on the ground who's even taken pictures. We find they're the same objects, the same cases in different parts. The object was seen departing to the south, and this person saw the object, to the south 5 minutes later and has the same photo. So very interesting to see these correlations across these groups that we're starting to see. And so we're taking this information, and we're not just, sitting on it. We are actually actively working to really achieve our mission, essentially, which is to treat this as a national security and an aviation safety issue.
Absolutely.
And so we have 2 programs that we have set up. One is with the government organization, as all I can say now, where we have certain cases that have particular that may be relevant for national security issues, and we bring those cases forward, and they're investigated thoroughly, and that's an ongoing relationship to ensure that there are no national security incidents that could be slipping through the cracks. And we're also working with a group of safety engineers and scientists, human factors engineers, cognitive scientists, who are also receiving these reports, and they're using that information to make recommendations for future reporting systems that pilots can use within the normal aviation safety reporting infrastructure that exists, such as the aviation safety reporting system at NASA. And so we're being very proactive with that data we received to actually do something with it, not just to collect it and have it. And that's been the main work that we've been accomplishing for the past, since the hearing, almost a year now.
That's fantastic. And I think I love the fact that you're looking at it because of safety issue, because it truly is. Rather than saying, oh, we need to find the little green man or whatever. If these things are out there flying around in the skies, which I believe, yes, they are, because there's enough evidence and whatnot to say so, it does pose a safety risk. It certainly does.
Yep.
And I'm glad you're looking at it that way. Go ahead, Shannon.
I would definitely say that regardless of where someone may sit on their belief system when it comes to UAPs, UFOs, any of that everybody should be able to agree on the fact that we need to have better accountability for what's in our skies if we want to keep people safe. Like, you don't have to say that it is anything spectacularly abnormal to be able to recognize that if they're not expecting it in their airspace when they're flying, then it poses a risk.
Absolutely.
And we need to have a way to report it. And I might not be correct in this, but I feel like in the last couple of years, the maybe the FAA had started a system where people were able to start reporting things that they were seeing that was sort of unusual because of all the attention that has been brought to the topic. But it doesn't sound like it's being utilized in the way that maybe it should be. So what it sounds like you're doing is providing a much better avenue for pilots to use in conjunction with people on the ground as well, which seems like it would just sort of, bolster the cases of saying that these are really happening because we have so many witnesses to them.
Yeah. And
Maybe
so you're absolutely right. Pilots essentially do not feel comfortable utilizing the existing mechanisms for reporting these because they've been told not to report these for so long. They absolutely do fear for, personal or professional ramifications that could occur from reporting this. And, when I was starting this conversation, 5 years ago, pilots were so uncomfortable, they didn't even want to bring it up to the co-pilot in the cockpit with them. Yeah. The conversation matured, and then they started talking about it in the cockpit. And then eventually they made the big decision, and I still hear this now as a point of hesitation, to go outside the cockpit, talk to ATC, air traffic control, on the radio, associate their call sign with this case now, because now it's kind of on the record. So for a while, pilots were very hesitant to even report to air traffic control that they were seeing these potential safety issues, and therein lies the problem. And that, that hasn't fully gone away, but the way the conversation has matured now, that it is absolutely changing, just not evenly. There are some major airlines now that they are receiving these reports from their pilots and actually filing internal safety reports regarding these specific type of events. There's other airlines that are, there's, I think, potential for collaboration for standardizing the type of reports that they are receiving from their pilots. And I saw a quick question in the chat about how Robert Bigelow was supposedly collecting air traffic control reports in the past as well. I had heard this in a conversation recently, but I think it's interesting to note, the major sticking point, which is what I just mentioned, is that pilots just don't feel comfortable reporting on air traffic control or through normal reporting mechanisms. And so the data is just skewed. You don't have a full understanding of the issue. And in fact, in our data, about 61% of commercial pilots that have reported us told us that they did not report to air traffic control, and they did not file any type of post-flight safety report. So that's 60% of the reports right off the bat. Now there's, to your point, there was, did the air traffic control, the FAA, implement some type of reporting system for air traffic control? Not to my knowledge. There was public statements made by the FAA chief that they were receiving onesie-twosie type reports from air traffic control, which made me scoff because I was personally receiving more reports from pilots at that point than he was claiming to receive from all of air traffic control. So he either thought, perhaps I was mistaken, or perhaps, he was mistaken. I think my data shows that pilots are still not comfortable reporting through the normal channels.
Yeah. And that's sad. Go ahead.
That's interesting that you put it that way too, because it seems like trust is earned, right? And they've, like you said, have been gone through the past history of it's not acceptable to report stuff like this. Mm-hmm. So you're keeping critical information that could cause people to lose their lives. The pilots have a lot going on. They've got a huge responsibility when they're flying aircraft, whether it's private, commercial, or military. There's a lot of responsibility in that cockpit. And even just seeing one of these things and not understanding what it is, let alone the potential for an impact with one, is distracting when something else may happen with the aircraft that needs the pilot's attention. And nobody's covering any of it. There's no visibility. So it's great to hear that you're collecting this information, doing it in a standard process. I'd love to see that bounced against, or the Skinwalker Ranch UAPs kind of bounced against that too. It's kind of been the case with the show and talking to the guys that, like you said, with the pilot that saw 7 out of 8 flights, they see him so often at Skinwalker Ranch. It's like, hey, there's UAP. Okay, let's go shoot another rocket. and they just go on because, of course, there's a UAP at Skinwalker Ranch. They're around all the time. It's really not that big a deal, and unfortunately, from my perspective, there's not a lot of meat on the bone for that. I mean, it's video, so it's seen at a distance. You're not seeing it live. Even Thomas Winterton says, sometimes they're so much bigger and brighter and more intense in person. He said, try and take a picture of the moon with your cell phone. It looks like a little tiny dot. It's not very impressive. Right. But the things that we're seeing live, it's through the lens of a camera. So we get that the show isn't going to represent it quite perfectly. But there's not a lot of data associated with that, other than they have cases kind of like you've already mentioned where it can be seen by the naked eye, but it's not something that's transmitting on ADS-B, or they can see it in infrared, but they can't see it with the naked eye. So they're seeing all the same kinds of things. It'd be great to bounce that data set against what you've got. So I think it's fantastic that you're giving an avenue or a venue that's safe for pilots to get this information out.
Yep.
Thanks, Mike.
And that being said, I mean, we're talking about the stuff that we see like on the live cams, what we've heard the guys tell us about what they see on the ranch. And then on top of that, just to play off of this whole thing, is we watch the ADS-B. We see how much air traffic is over the ranch and around the ranch, right? Like that in and of itself poses it always has to me as to whether or not the aircraft that are flying overhead are safe. If we're also seeing things, or the guys are seeing things, even just in this episode, it's sort of an atypical example, but the helicopter, I mean, there's no way of really knowing because it's footage or what have you, but hypothetically speaking, let's say that is something that is there and could pose a threat. I mean, Skinwalker Ranch is not alone in its sightings of things. It just happens to have an unusual amount of them, and then a camera crew to catch them, and a dedicated team to study them. But we do see aircraft go overhead all the time. Like, it's just the need for something like this feels really overdue. I feel like it's
absolutely
disappointing and has been surprising in the past few years as all of this has come to head, to find out that it wasn't in place to begin with. Like as just like a regular citizen, I am shocked that like we had no reporting system, like no proper reporting system for pilots if they were seeing unusual things in the sky that wouldn't then warrant them to have like a mental eval, because this stuff has been reported in the military for, I know, a long time.
Right.
Like, it's not unique or new. It just seems to be now the people are talking about it more, which is a good thing so that people can stay safe.
Yeah, absolutely. One question about you called it ASA. Is that what you ASA? Okay. Is that I did link by the way, folks, I did link that in the description of the show tonight, the .org for that. But is that something where are these cases being made public, or is it just a place for reporting and collection of data? How does that work for the public?
Yeah, it's a great question. So right now the data is considered pretty sensitive, and as the pilots report to me, it's still their information, and I'm not going to share it without their explicit permission.
Absolutely.
And many of them are worried that if certain amounts of the information is released, they could be identified, and that's essentially their biggest fear in this conversation. So we do intend to share the information, although we want to make sure that we're doing it with the proper safeguards in place to ensure that we don't harm anyone's career or otherwise hurt anyone, because I think the pilots are fearful for a good reason.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that they could face ramifications, and so that's why this problem is here. And I think one of the reasons the legislation that has been recently introduced, called the Safe Aerospace for Americans Act, is so important. It's legislation that we helped advise on. It's been introduced by Congressman Garcia and Grothman, and it essentially requires FAA to accept these reports. It requires them to gather additional information about them, and it requires them to funnel it to to one channel for national security, as well as through NASA for the aviation safety reporting system. So they can be studied as an aviation safety hazard. And that database is open source for analysis through the scientific community. And so should that legislation pass, that will essentially provide a more publicly accessible and standardized database that is federally controlled and accessible through a trusted system that pilots already utilize.
Yeah, that's great. So, okay. And I appreciate that too. And I know they do. That gives them the, makes them give them a safe place to put that where they know you're not going to be exploited. Oh, look at what we got now. That's, that's great.
A lot of them, they come out to me and they start the conversation with, hey, I know this sounds crazy, but I've done everything I can to kind of break down what this is. I've seen Starlink for years. I've seen, space junk. I've seen supernova. I've seen everything, but what I'm seeing now doesn't fit any type of category that I can put it in. And we deserve to give these pilots a place to report this. It's a shame that the system has failed them and essentially forced them to have to internalize this issue and essentially deal with it in isolation. Yeah, sorry, I was about to get angry.
No, I mean,
understand. I
That's fair.
So.
Yep.
I feel like it's justified. I feel like as a society, we should all be a little bit angry over the situation. It shouldn't have happened in the first place. And the fact that even now they still feel like they can only do it in secrecy is warranted and also very upsetting because we shouldn't be there. Like, people should be able to report things that they're seeing that they think are hazardous, and that should be the end of it. Like, there shouldn't be questions around safety, especially when it comes to flying. Like, yeah, I don't.
Well, I would encourage,
crazy.
any of. Oh, sorry. Please continue, Shannon.
No. I was just gonna say it sounds great. That's what sounds crazy to me. Like, that's the crazy part of it. But, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I would just take this moment, I guess, to suggest to any of the listeners here that, you can go to safeaerospace.org. You can read about our organization and what we do. And you can, it's not an obvious system. We're not out there with a form and that, trying to gather pilots. The pilots that have reported to me have essentially found me of their own accord, gone to the website, gone to the bottom of it and found my email address and simply emailed me. Right. And so that very non-streamlined process still getting, leading to hundreds of pilots, reaching out. So one of the things that we're looking to do in the future is to be able to scale those operations, be able to service more pilots and be able to really start gathering the data that's out there. Because every pilot that comes to me says, Ryan, you will not believe it. For every, one person coming forward, there's probably 10 others out there that just, aren't coming forward.
Yep.
Imagine if there was an easy reporting system in the cockpit. You do it, as you're finishing up the flight, do it real time.
We've thought about that. Right on the cockpit, they have iPads. You could, you'd have to be an FAA approved app, but that's actually an option. We created that optionality within the legislation that was introduced for them to be able to modify their systems for in-flight reporting.
It's amazing.
Yep, absolutely. So you know what, this brings us to, I'm going to kind of take back and we can go back and forth. This is one of those special episode reviews where we have a very special guest here, so we could go back and forth on this stuff. But talking about all of this and the safety factor, I mean, how many times, folks, have we seen where Cameron is up in a helicopter flying over Skinwalker Ranch, and we have seen on the cameras, we've seen some sort of a UAP or what appears to be a UAP. Well, I'm going to go ahead and say it is a UAP because it's not identified. They're unable to identify what it is flying around. Well, in this particular episode last night, they went over to the Roosevelt Municipal Airport, and they went over and they met up with Kendra and Sam, and they were going to fly a particular exercise or mission over the ranch. And in this particular case, everybody's meeting up with them over there. But you remember last week when they had the LiDAR, the ground-based LiDAR that picked up this anomaly, a dome or a cone or whatever you want to call it, around the ranch that was almost a mile across. And so what they wanted to do was take the plane out there. They wanted to fly and then drop smoke and fly kind of in a pattern around where the anomalous area is to see if they could get some sort of be able to see something from it, see some kind of thing. People have talked about dropping flour, dropping, whatever.
All sorts of stuff.
Yeah, all kinds of stuff, paint balloons, whatever they could drop.
Chalk. Yeah.
Chalk.
I
Yeah.
was quite excited about this experiment when I saw
Yep.
that they were doing it. I was like, oh, finally, they're going to try to drop some things that we can
Right.
get an outline.
Unfortunately, it fizzled because whatever reason, the plane was not able to do exactly what they wanted it to do. It only put out little sputters of smoke. It didn't give them what they were looking for, which I thought when they first mentioned it, it was like, when he talked about this, I was thinking in my brain, I thought, okay, it's like when they write in the sky with the smoke from the plane and they do letters or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, oh, that's what it's all about. Well, they had everything set up, high-speed cameras and everything out there going, and looking for the 1.6 gigahertz, which you saw Travis say that it did in fact show up as soon as the plane was entering the ranch aerospace. They started getting the signal, but he said the signal was coming from straight above. Last week it was coming from over by Homestead too. This time it was coming from straight above. Which I thought was very interesting. Which I thought, oh, good, they're going to be able to see something with the smoke. But unfortunately, as you see here, the plane was just putting out little sputters of little puffs of smoke, and it didn't get them what they needed. Then the plane started having issues. The oil temperature was fluctuating up high, dropping back low. And then they had the issue with the alternator not charging, shutting down and not charging the batteries, going back and forth. And we jump into that immediately going, why? Is it the ranch? Why is this happening to that effect? And then you heard Sam say that once they left the ranch's aerospace and headed back over towards Roosevelt Airport, the temperature
Settled
turned
down.
up. Yeah, 215 degrees. Everything was fine. It never fluctuated again. Is it that electromagnetic field causing the issue or not? But the interesting part about this was the fact that, in my mind, that the UAP that was discovered when they had the high-speed camera going, Erik had that was running out there, and he went through the data, and they found some sort of UAP hanging around the helicopter. Now, I don't know if you were there yet to see any of that kind of stuff, Ryan, when you were there. Okay, yeah, I had a feeling you probably weren't when you came out there. I did have this one picture here simply because I wanted to point out to everyone that, everybody. Well, the Kraken, yes.
The Kraken. I was going to be like, he's just sweet setup, because my God.
Well, I know. I could look at that all day.
Give me a setup like that, please.
Oh,
I wouldn't know what to look at, but goodness gracious.
Yeah, this was something. I don't know if you got to see the command center, the control room in here, but oh man, yeah. Eventually, I'm going to build a studio like this. Yeah,
like this. All right, invite me over, Jeff. Once you
all right.
built,
yeah,
I'll make a special trip.
Yeah, they do the GPS. Is my point with this too? Is not only the Kraken, of course, which is now on a big screen, but also that they put GPS on everything now. That's going to be flying around the ranch or whatever. And because people have asked that question, do they put GPS on everything? And yes, they do. Pretty much everything.
It is worth noting on that picture. Go back, Jeff. That there's 2 Krakens. There's one down south, so that will allow for triangulation. They'll be able to pinpoint if it's coming. The signal's coming from ground level.
Right.
They'll be able to pinpoint it a lot better than with just one. He did talk about having additional. If it's up in the sky, that'll be a little bit different problem to solve. But having 2 is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. Stephen, hang on one second. Stephen H, I'm gonna bring up your question here in just a second because I'm just about there. I was trying to hurry through this, but you see on this GPS data here, how many times have we seen it wonky? Is that a word, wonky? Messed
Yeah,
up.
it's a word in this circumstance. It's a word.
Okay, thank you. But this, look at this. I mean, it is pristine. This is what you want to see, in my opinion. They didn't talk about it at all because, of course, it wasn't an anomaly.
Right.
But look at that. That's what you want when you look at the data of a GPS. And how many times have we seen where it's not even close to being the actual track of the drone or whatever it may be, rocket or whatever.
I guess that'd be a question for Ryan. Is you heard Cameron say that the issues that the airplane saw were typical of Skinwalker Ranch, and in this case, it seems like for the most part it was electrical. There were issues with the alternator, with whatever control system was supposed to run the smoke. The oil temp gauge, probably more so than the actual oil temp jumping 30 degrees and then dropping back down. He has seen in that helicopter, which is shocking, problems with the GPS. They see GPS problems all the time, but aircraft GPS is a little bit different, higher end than your typical handheld type devices, where it's showing him not where he should be, or it's completely cut out. Any issues like that you see reported along with sightings?
The only aircraft type interaction reports that we have are typically from TCAS, which is like an anti-collision warning system, where that will either not indicate the presence of an object that is nearby, or it will. Either one, it can be disconcerting depending on the situation. But as far as, particular aircraft mechanical failure, not necessarily. And, I'll just say aircraft are, everything that can go wrong will go wrong at some point in those things. So I've seen a lot of different issues. So it's hard for me to say why any particular issue would happen in relation to the ranch.
There's a good question from Michelle. Ryan, if you're given the opportunity, would you fly over the ranch?
I would, sure. I certainly would. Yeah. Not because I think I would necessarily experience anything in particular, just because I like flying and I think it would be a good place. But I wasn't expecting to see something last time I was there either.
Yeah.
Right.
We're about to get to that too here in just a second, because and again, this is where I was headed with all this. I was trying to kind of hurry through the pictures to get to this point. But the helicopter with the high-speed camera. And we don't know, and I'm going to show this little picture here real quick. Here is that anomaly that was seen by the high-speed camera, and it's circled there. It's just a little faint dot. What I really appreciated from the guys was that they started talking. You heard Travis right off the bat. Is that a bug? Is that a bird? Is it, what is that? Is it something on the dome of the camera lens, or this, the cover of the camera lens, that could easily be explained? They go through all these questions and analyze this every single time they get one of these. So, when people throw out that stuff, oh, it's just a bird or a bug. Well, they've analyzed that as best they could to determine it is not one of those things. And I have a little video, and I captured a little video of this particular one that I want to show real quick too, because the movement of this particular UAP, and I'm going to stick with calling it a UAP, is very interesting, the way it maneuvered. And when we talk about the possible collisions or anything of a UAP that would be affecting an aircraft with people, this is one of those times. Let's take a look at this real quick. I want to show this little video of this one here. And first one, or a couple of clips here, is just the UAP moving slowly. So they could get a look at it. You can see it as it closes on the helicopter. And then there's a one here that's going to show it without the being circled. Now watch that. If you can see that dot, I know it's hard to see. You see it circle towards the helicopter, right up there, and then move away. And then it circles again. Now, is that something that's, yes, a bird could probably fly a pattern like that. And the other thing is, we don't know simply how far away that particular UAP is. Is it out there so far above the helicopter that it's just a little dot, or is it right there by the helicopter?
And
We
do
simply
keep in
don't.
mind this is 10 times slower than actual speed. This is 240 frames a second.
Right.
24 frames a second is normal. So 10 times slower than what was actually happening.
Yeah, there it is again as it sweeps in and it makes that move, and then it sweeps away, and then it's curving up again as it leaves. I mean, that's and we've seen the something that was moving underneath the helicopter as Cameron was flying it, and as Mike, you mentioned earlier, getting that little indication that it's telling him he's 50 feet above the ground when in fact he's at 2,000 feet or 3,000 feet. That, as a pilot, Ryan, you probably know, when something like that happens to an amateur pilot, you're going to freak out. I would. I'm not a pilot at all, but I mean, you have the presence of mind to know you're looking out the cockpit window. You can see that you're not 50 feet above the ground, but something like that changing your elevation, your readings that you're getting on your dash has got to be unsettling. I mean, I can't imagine personally what that would be like.
It's people don't quite understand, I think, for the most part, how issues snowball inside a cockpit. It's never just one issue or one incident that leads to an accident or a mishap. It's accumulation of effects, and that last thing, the last domino, the last hole in the Swiss cheese, as we used to say in the Navy. It might not be a big critical issue, right? It might be just looking away from your instruments for a period of time, and then that maintenance issue that you ignored, snowballed, and the gauge that you weren't, so like these things kind of add up, right? And so while these issues are never just one catastrophic, it's a multitude of small errors. We have to keep that in mind when we think about distractions, mid-airs, and operating down low like that is a very stressful environment. You're typically in some type of landing configuration. You might be in a high stress situation, and with a student pilot, a simple distraction because they thought they were about to be hit by an object could end up in a catastrophic mishap. Not necessarily because they hit the unknown object or UAP, but because they're distracted by an object that they weren't expecting to see there because it wasn't didn't have a transponder, it wasn't on any type of communication or anything like that. And so, this is a perfect example of why uncertainty in aerospace can lead to more complex issues than I think the average person would think of. It's not necessarily that you're going to hit the aircraft that's going to lead to that final domino falling.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to bring up Steven's point here. That faint blurry black dot that appeared by the helicopter was an abnormal ET appearance. In appearance, it could have been anything, or where this could damage your reputation of Skinwalker Ranch Experiments. Thoughts? I don't think so, because they are very good at saying this is what the data is showing us, but we don't know what it is. Mike kind of mentioned that earlier. I think they're very good at saying that, we're going to keep crunching the data. We're going to try to get some kind of answer to this. But here it is. They're being open with all of us in the public on this particular show and showing us these things, but admitting that they don't know exactly what it is. They're not coming to a conclusion here.
I also think that with this specific one, it does look very different than the ones that we typically
Yes.
see. And because of that, I appreciated the fact that they were analyzing it to see if it was a bug or a bird or all of those things. And this one, I think in particular, was one that was left pretty wide open as well.
Yep.
It wasn't like some of the ones we've seen in the past that have been sort of like that classic, what we're used to seeing being described as like a UAP in their airspace or otherwise, where the guys are like stunned and then move on now, because we've talked about that. Like they're just kind of like, this is old hat. But this one in particular, I think they left pretty open.
Yeah.
I didn't hear any definitives around it.
Well, no. And I think it was good that they actually went through and brought up the whole bug thing. Because of the bug, if it had been a bug, it would have been much closer to the camera and it would have been much more out of focus. So it had to be at a distance. They kind of talk through that, which, we know that we see, this is 42 minutes of many, many hours. Less than 1% of what's filmed is actually airs on TV. So there's so much more that goes into it. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. And keep in mind, by calling it a UAP, we're not saying, oh, that's ET.
Right.
By calling it a UAP, it means we cannot identify what that little speck is. We don't know.
Yep.
It shouldn't be a bug, because that would have been blurry and out of focus, and you probably wouldn't have even seen it, especially at 240 frames a second. It had to be further out at distance. They were trying to see, or hoping that it was going to actually cross either behind or in front of the rotors. They could have told then if it was nearer to the camera than the helicopter, or further than the helicopter. But it stayed just outside, almost like it kind of knew. So by calling it a UAP, it means they don't know what it is. So don't assume that by saying that they've actually categorized it. That's left wide open.
Yep.
This does make me think of another question for you, though, Ryan, which is, when we're looking at that, regardless of what it is, it's sort of like, it reminds me of it being the helicopters being checked on. And that makes me think about when we've talked previously about the idea that the government could be watching over Skinwalker Ranch. There's a lot of debate about whether or not that's happening, whether or not it's relevant. So my question actually for you is, where do you think the line between government overreach and government oversight is on this particular topic? So with like legislature that's come out recently, there's been a lot of conversation about eminent domain and all of that stuff. And with this particular issue, I think it's really interesting to kind of figure out where the line in the middle is. Do you have thoughts?
Yeah, that's a very big question. I will cop out and only answer to what I have personal experience with, which is
Fair enough.
So that's fair.
The government not doing enough to being able to help both the people they train within the military, not providing them the resources to be able to report on this from an aviation safety issue, but also as a national security issue. We've talked more about safety than national security, but as a fighter pilot, when we can't identify things in our space, that's a potential threat fighter. That's a potential bomber. That's a potential reconnaissance aircraft. And so for us to not have the agency or capacity or the tools or the reporting functionality or all those things that we're missing, to not have those is a disservice to those operators. They're not being given the proper tools because of a strange and antiquated stigma that is a potential avenue for adversaries to utilize to get closer to us. And we saw that last year with the spy balloons that were flying over. So
Yep.
I think very much there is I think the word you used was government overreach and government what was the other word you used?
Oversight and overreach.
Yeah.
Like,
So I think the government has been basically negligent in their interactions in the space that I've engaged in this topic with. And of course, the conversation can get much more complicated when you consider the claims that Mr. Grush made. But those are not, like I said, things that I have firsthand information on. So I'm going to cop out on that.
understandable. I'm always the one that's like, if there's a wormhole, then I want the government to know that there's a wormhole. Like, I will be very disappointed if somebody has a wormhole in their property and our government is unaware that there's a wormhole on U.S. territory and they're just turning a blind eye to it. So I can understand that. I think it's a little different, I suppose, when it has to deal with strictly airspace. But no, that's good. I think that's, based on everything that you're sharing, that seems like an accurate assessment too, which is a shame.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I love what you're doing with that. I really do. I just applaud you for that effort that you're taking forth with the with ASA. What you guys went into the command center, area 58, as the table says. You got to sit around the famous table, which would be so awesome to do. But they showed you that, and Travis had talked about this particular UAP that he had spotted, the picture they took, and then his drawing of it that he came up with, and he was showing that to you. You had mentioned in there too about the And again, I don't want to go into all this, the recollection of your particular case that you had, but talking about the cube inside of a bubble, so to speak. Did this, when he showed you this, what was your reaction? What was your thoughts on it when you saw this particular?
Yeah, the larger image there, looks pretty similar to some of the things that we'd see out on the eastern seaboard. When we talk about silver spheres or
Mhm.
gray spheres, that's pretty much what we're talking about. It's one thing to see it on a sensor system and um, look at it a little bit while you're flying or even after the flight, but to zoom in and like kind of getting all the details like that wasn't really our experience. So,
Right.
for all I knew, there was some kind of crevice around the middle, but that's not, we didn't really analyze it that much, at least at the time.
Mhm. Yeah, that was interesting when he well, let me bring that back up real quick. When he showed this, and you could see that split, on this particular cloudy, blurry image, you can see that little split there, and for him to come up with that. But your description of the cube inside of a bubble, um, actually kind of bothers me a bit because of course, being a Star Trek guy, you're thinking about the Borg or some kind of weird thing like that. But being a cube that's inside of a bubble, then of course I would think of some sort of a warp bubble or some sort of a bubble that would keep them away from the gravity and all of that, so they weren't affected by gravity. Be some sort of a containment bubble. That makes total sense to me. So I when you mentioned that and you described that, and I've listened to a few of your podcasts that you've done and whatnot, that actually kind of gives me chills a little bit, honestly. That particular description of the UAPs that you've seen. So, but
You're
this,
not alone. I've heard that before.
yeah,
I think the part that gives me chills is the size descriptions that we get.
oh,
So what did they say? Like, on average, what would you say the normal size descriptions are? Because when I hear 15 feet, I'm like, that's way too big. I don't like that at all.
Yeah, 5, 15 feet. That's pretty much what we were seeing. Yeah.
wow, yeah,
It's
Considering the
also what
damage a
was being
bird can
reported by
do,
the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office as well, with their report seeing spheres, which was I think 2 to 4 meters in diameter, which is pretty close.
Mm-mm. I don't
it's
like
not
that at
good.
all.
Nope, that's not good.
no, like you said, Mike, how much damage a bird can do
Yeah.
to an aircraft, something like that. Definitely, um, yeah, definitely a risk in the skies. The guys did their usual as they were setting up that night, and the experiment that you were able to witness or be part of, I should say, was really cool. I mean, we get a lot of people that are asking us all the time, why do they shoot so many stupid rockets? Why the rockets? Why the rockets? And the rockets are, and we've talked about this many, many times on the show. They're simply there because they are, in most cases, and they've stated this on the show several times, but in most cases they get a response, they get something happen because of the rockets, and they're also they're looking to see, like the one that went up and it seemed like it hit something. That's when they were talking about the blob uh over the ranch. It looked like it hit something and exploded. Here they were doing the simultaneous launching, 4 in the east field and 4 over by the triangle, and which was really interesting to see that happen. Just a quick picture of that. It was kind of cool how they were going through all of that. But the Kraken, of course, and picked up a signal that was coming from off in a different direction, not towards Homestead 2. And this one was right about the 1.6 gigahertz. It was a little shy or a little more than that, somewhere in between 1.6 and 1.65, coming through there, of course. And this was remember when Travis, he goes out there and he turns his antenna. He wasn't picking it up at all. This is verification from the Kraken, because he went out and turned his antenna in the direction that the Kraken was saying it was coming from, and boom, as soon as he brings it around, there's the signal. It's coming in. And it's kind of weak, but it's there. Again, why? What in the heck is creating this signal? And it's still undetermined. They still do not know what it is, but it keeps coming. And it was, in Travis's opinion, this could be also risk. Something, if something's transmitting on this frequency and it's coming from all different kinds of directions, that also is a problem that they need to take very seriously. So, um, the different rockets taking off and all of that. And then, of course, the UAP showing up on the, and you said this was an infrared that you were watching, Ryan?
Yep. Yep.
And this UAP showing up on here, and you brought it up to his attention, to Travis's attention, and you noticed it coming out of the sky. And of course, this was another one where we were able to get the video, and I took a little video clip of this as well, and I'll get over to that. I guess I'll show the video first, and then I'll ask my question of you, if you don't mind. But here it is here, and this is where you spotted it right there. And it's moving down towards the, is that those are clouds there?
Yep.
Okay. And you got Travis's attention. He came over to have a look at it. And there it was, moving its way along and actually turning. Go ahead, Shannon.
You were only there for one night, or is this over the course of a few days? So in one night, one try, you
Yep.
saw something.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then it just, they lost track of it. And you think, oh, was it going behind the clouds? Well, it was in front of the clouds, you can see. But it gets down very close to ground level, and it simply is gone. We don't know. Again, it's a UAP. We don't know what the heck it was. But it traveled in, and it actually made a turn, and it looked like it was coming down. Now, this, according to, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mike or Shannon, was this came down in the area of where they seen the UAP into the mesa before?
Yeah, that was the direction it appeared to end up when it got down near the horizon. Ryan, I'm assuming that was not visible with the naked eye. It was only through IR that you're able to see it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although I can't necessarily say that with the certainty of having known exactly where to look for and not being able to see it. We saw it on the camera, and I didn't know exactly where in the sky that was necessarily pointed. So we looked, didn't see it, but not to say it was impossible to see.
Okay.
Yeah. What was your thought when you saw that? I mean, what was your, if you could, this is the thing of the show, is that we get the opportunity to see what's happening out there through the eyes of the camera, of course, and through your assessment, the assessment of those. And that's why I have to ask this question. When you saw that, I mean, what was your take on the whole thing personally for you?
Yeah, I mean, I generally just didn't jump to a conclusion. I mean, looking at it, I was like, it doesn't look like an aircraft. That doesn't look like, something I would expect to see, a bird. So it didn't immediately fit a bucket when I looked at it. It did look weird and strange. But that's what's strange about this topic, right? There's a lot of that. And you have to be willing to be wrong, or else you'll be too afraid to engage the topic, right?
Right.
But like I said, it didn't fit any buckets, and then the way it disappeared was strange. And those are the things that we're out here to try to better understand. So I think it was, I'm like great, it was one of those things that just get your curiosity going, but it doesn't necessarily satiate it, right?
Right.
At least for me.
Yeah. Interesting.
No, it leaves you more questions than answers, for sure.
Yep. And there's a question I was going to bring up. Thank you, Christina. Ryan talks about UAPs being observed either via aircraft systems or in plain sight. Did you ever receive any strange audio radio type signals like they get at the ranch?
Not necessarily. We have seen our radar be disrupted somewhat. Sometimes when we're interrogating some of the objects. And what that looks like is what we call jamming indications. And so it looks like as if they're jamming us, but really what's happening is our waveform is just being changed in some way. Our radar that was pinging out there and coming back has changed. And our radar, it's not that smart. It's not like thinking, obviously. So, in real time, it's getting some data back. It looks different. So it's classifying it as jamming. I don't necessarily think that was exactly what was happening.
Right.
But no, not anything that would be considered like communication or comms or, weird throbbing sounds on the radio or anything, right? Just kind of business as usual. But then, we would have that jamming indication sometimes. Yeah.
Either I'm going to open it up to the chat if you have any questions, or Mike or Shannon, if you have any other questions for Ryan or attorney. Now's the time to throw those out here. I really, like I said, I'm really honored by the fact you came on the show here tonight and shared your stuff with us, your information with us, and also, that about ASA. I'm really I'm again, I know I mentioned this earlier, but I'm really happy that someone is doing what you're doing with that. It really, it means a lot to give everybody a place where they can do this. Let's see.
Thank you.
Yep. So, let's see here. Let's see. Sometimes they see UAPs with their eyes. Other times UAPs they don't. What's the difference? Oh well, yeah. There's the one that you spotted was on infrared. Yeah, and we saw one from last week that Erik spotted. If we all recall that one, it was moving very slowly down towards I think that was coming from the north over the mesa, and it was moving down very slowly towards the mesa, but they could not see it with the naked eye.
Right.
So I guess the question I would have for you on that, Ryan, is like cloaking or simply I don't know. What do you think? Why would some be seen and some not? And just, I know this is asking your complete opinion because I don't know that you've studied this, but
Yeah, I mean, well, actually, let me just say this. So, I've been studying a lot of this stuff and this topic for a while, from technologies that might be relevant to understanding how we could be seeing things that might be our own technology, to hypothetical examples of what these could be from spacecraft and how they might work, to other things. And I've recently started a Substack, basically a written blog, where I'll be kind of jumping into these topics in more long form format. So if anyone wants to sign up for that, you can go to ryangraves.substack.com, and I'll be diving into a lot of these different pieces one by one. But actually, let me re-ask you to ask the question again to make sure I answer it correctly now that I said that.
well, this particular person was saying, whoops, nope, that wasn't the one. Let's bring that one up.
All right.
Let's see. Oh, here it is. Here, sometimes they see
yeah.
the UAPs with their eyes, and other times they don't.
Yeah. So there's certainly technology where we've been working on, other folks have been working on visual stealth technology, and so I don't think you can necessarily totally discount that from being something that could be an answer here. I don't think there's going to be a single answer. But it's extremely hard to tell. I mean, we just don't have the tools, and it can be difficult in the sky. There can be a lot of confusion. Perhaps the sensors could be slightly misplaced. It's not inconceivable, and that we could be looking in the wrong direction. But to consistently have that type of failure over multiple attempts to visually ID them, I don't know. I just know that we weren't able to see them, and yet they were on our sensors. And there's hypothesis for why that could be, and I don't have an answer to any of them, unfortunately.
As far as like reporting goes, just to tag onto that really quick, Jeff, I'm sorry.
No, please go ahead.
Statistically, are you finding that pilots are reporting things with their eyes that aren't on their systems versus them seeing it on their systems and not with their eyes? Like, is that even?
Mostly them being able to see on their systems and then not being able to see it with their eyes.
Wow. Interesting.
Okay.
Wow. Yeah, that would be that would be kind of, I think I would be almost more unnerved by that, seeing it on my systems, but not being able to actually see it, physically see it. I think that would be more unnerving to me. I don't know.
Maybe this is a silly question to ask then. If it's showing up on systems and not by a visual, is it, I'm not a pilot. I don't understand the technology that goes into what they're looking at. But is it not a possibility that something like a hack could be putting something on a sensor to disorient a pilot? Is that a possibility at all? Or is there stuff in place to prevent that from happening?
Yeah, we deal with that stuff all the time, actually. And we classify it not as hacks, but as electronic warfare. And they do everything from disable our systems to make us see things that aren't there. But there are indications when that's occurring. And it can happen to one sensor, but it can happen to all our different sensors at the same time in perfect synchronicity.
Got it. Okay.
And that's really where, when we have that correlation across sensors, we have to assume they represent physical objects at that point.
That makes total sense. Thank you for answering that.
Yeah, that was Pete Kelsey jumping in. What was that again? Can you put that back up? Yeah.
Thermal. Yeah.
That was Pete Kelsey jumping in there. That was my thermal drone and Ryan's keen eye that caught that. That was really cool.
Pete.
Yep. Yeah, he's a good guy. He's a good friend of the show. We appreciate Pete very much and the work that he does. Here's a good question too that Jerry N asked. In your experience, are the UAPs defying conventional physics, such as supersonic without sonic booms? You've in your experiences of seeing these things.
I won't say in my personal experience, because although I've been in the same vicinity as these objects where they've been supersonic, I can't comment whether there was a sonic boom or not, and just don't have the tools to tell. But based off of conversations with other pilots and things that they have witnessed, typically there doesn't seem to be any type of sonic boom. But very very preliminary type reports, anecdotal type reports.
There was another question about hitchhikers. It was Tina Brubaker was asking.
Jeff, I apologize. I have to go after this last question.
Okay, all right, no problem at all. There was a question about hitchhikers. Have you heard of that effect, the hitchhiker effect? Sometimes people from the ranch, or even on a paranormal investigation or something, they say they go home and then they have the a presence follow them, or anything weird happened since you left the ranch, or?
Oh, I've had lots of weird stuff happen, but I don't think necessarily. I don't think I'm here to claim any hitchhiker effects, though. No, not yet.
That's good. That's good. All right. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much, Ryan. I really, really appreciate it, and I'm honored to have you on the show. Really love to see you on the ranch, and we hope that you will be there again someday, because I think that your input to what they're doing is needed. It might be very, very helpful to them because you have some very great experiences of your own. So thank you very much, sir. And again, thank you for your service, being a Navy pilot, a job that I couldn't imagine. You ever land on a aircraft carrier?
All the time, yeah.
Maybe I would say you probably did that quite frequently. I don't know how you guys do that kind of stuff. I witnessed it myself many, many times being out at sea, but like landing on a postage stamp.
I just describe, absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it, sir. You have a wonderful evening. And again, thank you for coming on the podcast tonight.
It was a pleasure talking with y'all.
All right.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Bye.
Wow. That was fantastic. Was it not?
It was. It was great. Little
Talk
surprise
about
guest there that we got.
a much needed service to the ASA. I mean, that it just, like you said, he was kind of getting mad. Just thinking about it. I mean, to put pilots in that position, that's just unconscionable.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Go ahead, Shannon.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie. None of this makes me want to fly, though. I've been trying to work on that. My brand new fear of flying, which now I'm beginning to feel is quite warranted, to be honest with you. None of that was encouraging to me. It's great that we have it, though. It's so surprising that we didn't have it in place to begin with. You would think,
I know,
just common sense, no matter what it is in your airspace, that you would have a place to report it. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
No,
right.
Doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. And it goes back to the whole, I think it all starts with the cover up, of government not wanting to talk about it because, and they thought at the time, the fear of the country, sending people into a panic, letting them know that little space aliens do exist or something like that. Who knows? But that continuing that over the years, and then, the tinfoil hat and many of the things that came from that, the downplaying of everything, like I said, the tinfoil hats and all this kind of stuff, put that upon people to not talk about it. You're going to lose your job. You're going to lose your status. You're going to lose your flight credentials. Something's going to happen if you try to report these things. And thank goodness for those people, George Knapp, the people that were out there that were able to continue and talk about this. to hell with the repercussions. And now we see it happening in, all the time, this sort of thing in the age of the cell phone. We're seeing all kinds of stuff happening all the time now, and it's due time that it's opened up so that people can report this, especially pilots and people of paid observers, police officers, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it needs to be there so that he can report these things. Absolutely.
I like that it's being corroborated also with just regular civilians on the ground too, because it's a kind of a holistic, if you will, approach to the issue that you're talking about. You're getting eyes on it from several places, which lends validity to the sighting itself. Again, that doesn't say what it is.
Correct.
But I think that's almost less important. I do think that's less important than the issue at hand, which is the safety of our skies and having an atmosphere in which people can report things that they're seeing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's nice that he's, like I said, created a avenue for them to report information. Because he said in a different interview, there's no version of this where not collecting data is the right thing to do. We should be collecting data.
Absolutely.
We should be collecting every aspect of what's going on, even things that may not be obvious, like some of the information from the aircraft and the data recorders. Who knows? Maybe every aircraft that gets near one of these has their oil temperature jump by 30 degrees. I don't know what that means. I don't know what the conclusion is, but it's would be very pertinent. And you're not going to know that if you don't collect the data. And the good news is the more people that come forward with that information, the less important any one report becomes. And so that anonymity, because of the size of the data set, would inherently protect the pilots from any repercussions. So huge kudos to him for taking the initiative to do something like that.
Absolutely.
I mean, honestly, not to get onto the whole conversation, but it's not like any of us haven't been watching the news with all the stuff that's been going on with Boeing.
Yes.
You would think that at bare minimum right now that they would be, at least like the FAA, all these airlines would be very willing to focus on, or even just refocus attention on the airspace safety, given everything that's been happening. Like it honestly, like, I think we should set that bar. It's not a high bar. Like, they have doors coming off of airplanes right now. They can let pilots report things that they see in the skies. I think it just seems insane.
Yep.
And maybe just the conversation around it changing is helpful too, because the pilots of today are, a new generation of pilots. So hopefully that means that they've grown up with a kind of a little different conversation around it.
Yep.
I mean, I think a lot of these topics are getting touched on more because of that as well. But
I agree.
Yeah.
That said, I ain't flying anytime soon.
I know. I've actually looked at taking a ship.
Thank you, Linda.
That's how bad my fear of flying has gotten. I'm like, could I take a ship to Europe? How would I do that? Now I'm like.
Well, the good news is the pilots are all very, very well trained. So that's the good news.
Yes.
That is the good news. You know what? I do say that to myself, where like all of these things have happened and yet they've managed to land and it's been all right, but still, what a bummer.
Yeah, I know, right? Here's a question that might be for you, Mike. Talking about the Kraken, and I was trying to find it. It had something about whether or not the Kraken can tell height besides just the direction. No, just the direction. Okay, just
the direction. Okay. Yeah, that's. But I think they showed in the preview for the next episode, Travis grabs a directional antenna to figure out and point it upwards to see if it's in the sky. But yeah, the Kraken would not. It would still indicate the direction it was coming from, even if it was up, however high, because it's still using the differential between the antennas. Time of arrival of that signal to each one of those antennas. So it doesn't really matter if it's high or low, it's going to still point in the right direction. And with two of them, as you saw on his screen, he's got two. They can know essentially if it was like on the ranch or just off the ranch. They can tell that direction, but then to get elevation, that'll take a little bit more. But I suspect they may have something in the works.
Yeah, that'd be great if they did, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and somebody else just brought up a point that I was going to elaborate on, and I kind of forgot. But thank you for bringing it up. It was John, and Christina had the question up there. It is here. The theory about the Alaskan Triangle and missing people, and here it is on Skinwalker Ranch and Miller Ranch. The same signal as was detected on both ranches. Pieces are starting to fit. That was a point I was going to make as well. And I've talked about the fact that there are other UFO hotspots and other places around the world where strange things are happening, but they're not being studied quite like they are on Skinwalker Ranch. But you know what? I'm glad that Beyond is doing what they're doing, Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, because they're now starting to find out that it is not isolated to just this one place. They may start finding more and more places where they're getting this high strangeness there as well. So I'm glad they're doing what they're doing, because I strongly believe that this is not just a unique place. It is unique, but not so much in the world view. I think there's many more places like this around the world, and hopefully they're getting so close to being able to find the right technology to be able to see what's going on and detect what's going on. Can you
The
imagine?
right technology, I think, is probably being built right now somewhere without us even knowing.
Probably.
That will help in this. I mean,
And it may not even be for this application.
Right.
no, that's
Right.
for
Yeah.
something totally different.
Yeah.
It's
Exactly.
it's incredible. And I did like a comment that was, I don't know who said it, but I agree with the fact that Ryan coming on to the show, I think, helps lend credibility, because we can see in conversation with him just how cautious he is in assigning
Yeah.
any type of definitives, which is exactly what's needed. And I think that needs to be sort of like reaffirmed to the public in terms of the show and UAPs and all of that, that the majority of the people that are working in the sector towards finding answers are ones that are coming at it very cautiously. They aren't they aren't excitedly assigning sort of like this phenomenal thing to it. They're asking the right questions, and they're collecting data over a period of time, and they're trying to understand the problem set. So I agree with that.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, I was just looking at some of the chat here too. Linda talking about it. She's an Air Force mom, but her son can't talk about what he has seen. And that's the duty right there of the servicemen and women out there. That there were people years and years and years ago that were sworn to secrecy of things, and they took it to the grave with them.
So I don't think I'll get in trouble saying this, but if my dad ends up watching this, it's been enough time, and my grandfather's passed away. But my grandfather used to, during the Cold War, oversaw like a whole, I guess, fleet off the coast of Miami. Like, he was the man that oversaw the fleet. And so he'd have to watch the radar at night. My dad told me that he was the one that was in charge of like pressing the button, I guess, if something happened.
Oh wow!
And one night, my father, as a child, I don't know how old he was, but was down there with my grandfather, and apparently something showed up on the radar that went across it so fast that
Wow!
there was no way that it was a plane or anything like that. And my grandfather told him that he sees them on occasion. And this is information that I had to like pull out of my dad after finding out what my grandfather did, because my grandfather also worked out at White Sands. So I had a bunch of questions.
Right?
And then my dad volunteered that eventually. And I'm just thinking, like, how many stories are there like that? There's
Yeah.
limitless. There's got to be so many stories like that that are just in people's families. My grandfather didn't make a big deal out of it, but he made it very clear that, like, this isn't ours and this isn't the enemy's. I don't know what this is. Watch it. Like, that's crazy to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's literally, I guarantee there's literally thousands and thousands of those stories that have not been told.
Mm-hmm. I
Um,
guarantee
whatever
it.
reason. Yeah. Yeah, I wish I looked up more when I was out to sea. Me too. So did I. Oh, that was a weird thing. Going out at sea, being out at sea in the middle of the ocean, away from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles away from any landmass, and going out on a clear night. It was amazing. It's
Yeah.
like going out to the desert, the deep, far away from any city. Crazy the number, the amount of night stars and everything to see. It's just amazing. Yeah. And I wish I would have spent more time looking up, but I do
So we
now.
all can do.
So, yeah,
Look up.
exactly. Yep. Keep looking up, folks. That's what's going to be the theme for the show tonight. Mike, thank you. Shannon, thank you. Any final thoughts on the episode?
More good stuff.
More good stuff.
More good
Indeed.
stuff.
We're
Can't wait
halfway
for
through
the.
the season, right?
It's hard to
Yes.
believe. Can't
Yeah.
wait for the next
It's been a
half.
wild ride.
Yes, it
Mhm.
has. Yes, it has. All right. That's it for us, folks. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And again, hats off to Ryan Graves for joining us on the show tonight. We really do appreciate that very, very much. And like I said before, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and give us a thumbs up if you like the content of our show here tonight. It does help us out quite a bit. And we appreciate each and every one of you. And thank you for those who donated with the super chats and that tonight. Thank you very, very much. Appreciate it. That's it for me. We'll catch you next time right here on the J Free 906 podcast. Good night, everyone.